We know from last week that the Bush administration was largely neocon. We haven't really talked about this, but I don't think any of you will be surprised that Barack Obama was largely a liberal internationalist. So what we would know from the beginning right now, so if you knew nothing else about Barack Obama, and you would probably say, well, because these are both liberals, or liberalism IR, we would expect there to be some similarities between their approaches. Maybe even more so than between them and, say, a defensive realist like Nixon. So that's actually a place to begin right there. So let's walk through the national security. Oh, by the way, that question I asked on the last page, let me just go back really fast. Obama, is it new counterterrorism strategy or the same old thing? And here's the deal. I don't know about the same old thing, but the same thing as the Bush administration, the same Bush thing. That's going to be your assignment. It's going to be about a paragraph just answering that question. So I don't want to answer that question for you. I want you to sort of say, clearly there's similarities, clearly there's differences. Does it lean more towards something new, or does it lean more towards the same thing that the Bush administration was doing, just with different language associated with it? So let's talk about what the goals of counterterrorism are in the national security document, or national strategy for counterterrorism document of 2011. I had you guys just read the fact sheet because I put so much on your plate on Monday that I tried to reduce it down. If you want to read the large document, that's fine. Here's the deal. So there's two things about a strategy. A strategy is trying to achieve some goal, and it's using some means to achieve that goal. So this slide, we're going to talk about what the goal is, and next slide, we're going to talk about what the means are. So what are you trying to achieve? Like, how do you know your counterterrorism strategy has been effective? So here's the goals of counterterrorism. Number one, protect U.S. citizens' territory and interests. Nothing too drastic there. Great. Disrupt, degrade, dismantle, and defeat Al-Qaeda. All right, so let's talk about this for a second. Why is this significant? And again, I'm trying not to compare it at all to the Bush administration. That's going to be your job. But you'll note that it's not saying we're going to disrupt, degrade, dismantle, and defeat that entire network. That network, by 2008, it's pretty clear the network is pretty big. The odds of the United States really disrupting that, or getting rid of that network is just unheard of. So let's focus on the group that made 9/11 happen. And in fact, you might get this criticism from the Obama administration about the Bush administration that by widening out that network, to disrupt, degrade, and dismantle that network, that's what caused sort of the war in Iraq and all over the world. Now, this is going to be a good thing and a bad thing for Obama, and it's going to change as we go on. At the beginning, so what he's going to do is he's going to not ignore is the wrong word, but he's definitely going to be focused on Al-Qaeda and getting Osama bin Laden. He's not going to be as focused on those other organizations that are sort of all over the world. And by the end of his presidency, he's going to be having a problem with one of them called ISIS. It sort of has some room to grow and breathe. And this is going to have to change as time goes on. So another thing I want you to look at is just these words, like what's the goal here of these words? Defeat is one, by the way, right here, that even though that's in a national security document, the DoD actually tried not to use the word defeat, because can you really defeat an organization like that? You can defeat you can defeat the Nazis in World War II, but you can't really defeat a terrorist organization that well. You can just make it disrupt, degrade, dismantle. Those are going to be the words the DoD likes. Keep weapons of mass destruction away from terrorists, very important there. Eliminate the safe havens, so there should be no place where terrorists can sort of go to ground. Build counterterrorism partnerships and capabilities, so working with allies, other states, things like that. Degrade the links between Al-Qaeda and others, so again, it's that focus on Al-Qaeda, you're trying to cut them out of that network. cut the funding and resources to terrorists. So this is another thing. By the way, this is one of the first things that the Bush administration did. It wasn't that we sent troops to Afghanistan and things like that, but they tried everything they could to cut off all funding to any organization that was like a terrorist organization. And that is more sophisticated at this point. Counter AQ ideology. So again, supporting moderates, that kind of thing. And then diminish specific drivers of violence AQ exploits. And so here's the argument. This goes back to that research. So what we know is that relative poverty. No, that's not right. I'm saying that wrong. What's a good example of this? Okay, let me give you an example. Here's the deal. Here's what we found out in the 8 years since 9/11 when Obama's coming in, is that essentially the people who are most likely to be terrorists are not the poor and not necessarily the rich. They're the people who would have done fairly well. They have an education, like they are trained to be doctors, they trained to be lawyers and things like that, but there weren't any opportunities in their societies for them to advance. These are the people that tended to be the most ticked off. It's almost like middle class with low expectations because of various reasons like economic problems and things like that. If we could find out who is most likely or what the sort of conditions are that most likely lead to people joining groups like Al-Qaeda, then what we should do is we should diminish those things. So for example, if we do find out that poverty plays a role, how do we alleviate poverty? We should be helping alleviate poverty in those societies. That's counterterrorism. And so what are the means for achieving this? Number one is adhere to U.S. core values. This is coming in the wake of a lot of conversations in the Bush administration about the use of torture and waterboarding. And essentially this argument goes, we can fight terrorists, but we have to fight them using U.S. values, not using their rules. So things like uphold the rule of law. Now, okay, this is going to be a big question mark thing because, okay, well then that means that we're not going to use drone strikes because those are technically against international law. Well, no, not really. So this is going to be a sort of a way to talk about it, but don't get too excited about it. One of the things that candidate Barack Obama came in and said is we have to get rid of Guantanamo. I don't know what I'm saying there. Guantanamo Bay in Cuba, and obviously it's it's still open today. He had 8 years of presidency and never closed it because there wasn't a good way to close it. So did U.S. core values dominate, or were other things going on there? So again, this is rhetoric. It's not inconsequential rhetoric, but it's still rhetorical. Build security partnerships. So again, I want to point out that idea that Obama is a liberal internationalist, and what would that have to do with security partnerships? I'll leave that to you to think about. Use counterterrorism tools and capabilities appropriately, and what this means largely is referring back to this right up here. And then build a culture of resilience, which is essentially, here's the argument. There's been a lot of changes in sort of counterterrorism research at this point. And as the Democrats come in, they have a very different sort of view on some of these things. But, it's not like the George W. Bush administration would have been talking about a culture of resilience. But let's just talk about what this means here. For this document, it's if they can't hurt us, they'll stop trying. So if, and by the way, this is the very same argument that George W. Bush makes after 9/11. So 9/11 happens, George W. Bush goes on TV probably a week later and says, here's how we defeat the terrorists. Go out tomorrow and buy stuff. Shop. Go back to your routine life, and that will demonstrate to the terrorists that they can't win. And that's essentially what this is talking about, is on two levels, right? If they can't actually get into the United States to harm the United States, they'll stop trying that after a while. And if they do actually harm the United States, and yet the United States doesn't change, it is, we're resilient, then they'll realize that's a bad strategy and they'll stop doing it. More importantly, AQ will shift from hard targets to soft ones. And again, it's that idea, okay, then what are the soft ones? It doesn't really mention this in the document, but I can tell you what the soft targets were. So again, the hard targets are going to be things like the United States. That's going to be a hard target. You can get in the United States, but it's going to be really, really difficult to pull that off. We are watching everything, everywhere, blah, blah, blah. So if you really want to pull off a terrorist attack, the United States is not the place to go. What are the soft targets? It's going to be Europe. And Europe's going to see an upswing in terrorist attacks. The Madrid bombings, in other places, you're going to sort of see this upswing. France is going to be a big target of these by the end of the Obama presidency. Other soft targets are going to be U.S. troops out there. Again, they are a nice, juicy target. You don't have to go anywhere. We're sending you the targets. Go ahead and see if you can get them. We're going to do everything we can to stop that from happening, but at least you're going to be targeting them who can defend themselves and not people back home. These become sort of the main soft targets here. All right, so what we're going to do now is you're going to read an article by Jessica Stern, who's going to sort of say, all right, let's see, how did the Obama counterterrorism strategy look? She's writing this in 2015, so it's on the heels of the Trump-Clinton election, and she's thinking ahead, like what's the next president going to have to deal with?